We're here today to talk about private corporate rail police in Canada. When rail workers are injured or killed on the job, their families and loved ones deserve an independent, impartial, objective investigation into what occurred. Now, unfortunately, here in Canada, our country allows the archaic practice of allowing rail corporations to investigate themselves. They allow the utilization of private corporate rail police to look into the circumstances of rail incidents. This presents an egregious conflict of interest. Multi-billion-dollar rail corporations should not be investigating themselves. And so today we are joined here to call for the abolishment of private corporate railway police in Canada. I'm joined by a number of speakers, and I'll introduce them briefly. First, we're joined by my colleague Alexandre Boulerice from Montreal. He's the NDP's Labour critic. Also joined by Laurie Desrochers. Laurie is the wife of Kevin Timmerman. He was a rail worker with a 30-year safety record who was killed in CN's Saskatoon rail yard in 2015. On Zoom, we're joined by Pam Fraser. She's the mother of conductor Dylan Paratus, who was killed in the CP rail derailment near Field, BC in February 2019. And we're joined by Mr. Tevengwa Renyoa, who is the lawyer representing the families. So as I mentioned, we're calling for the abolishment of private corporate rail police in Canada because of the conflict of interest that exists. And we believe that these private corporate police should be replaced by a public rail police body that would be funded by the rail corporations and accountable to an independent civilian oversight body. This is similar to the situation in the UK and would allow for the independent and impartial investigations that are so important to ensure that family members get the justice that they deserve. Finally, I'll note that the Transport Committee conducted an extensive study on rail safety in Canada and issued a report in the spring of this year. One of the report's 33 recommendations is for amendments to the Canada Rail Safety Act to remove the conflict of interest that currently exists when rail corporations investigate themselves. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Alexandre Boulerice, who's going to speak en français.
Merci, merci beaucoup, Taylor. Ça me fait plaisir d'être ici aujourd'hui pour parler de sécurité ferroviaire. Et le point que mon collègue, M. Bachrach, amène est essentiel, c'est-à-dire comment ça se fait que ces grandes compagnies ferroviaires ont leur propre police privée. Non seulement ils se policent eux-mêmes, mais en plus de ça, ils peuvent donner des amendes aux citoyens et aux citoyennes. Dans Rosemont-Petite-Patrie, près du métro Rosemont, il y a des gens qui, parce qu'on n'a pas de passage à niveau depuis des années, des gens qui traversent le chemin de fer, ils peuvent avoir des amendes jusqu'à près de 150 $. Alors, c'est des policiers, des policières privés qui gèrent leur terrain. Et on a tout un système où ces grandes compagnies ferroviaires-là ont un paquet de privilèges. Non seulement ils se policent eux-mêmes, quand il y a des tragédies et des accidents, ils enquêtent sur eux-mêmes, puis ensuite de ça, ils font leur propre autorégulation sur la santé et sécurité, puis la sécurité du matériel et des trains qu'ils gèrent. Alors, c'est un système où on a l'impression que ces grandes compagnies CP et CN sont presque au-dessus des lois, presque au-dessus des gouvernements, et on laisse traîner cette situation absurde depuis des années. Et ça a des conséquences. Ça a des conséquences graves. Chez nous, ça fait des années que les députés néo-démocrates, M. Molker, Mme Laverdière, on demande de pouvoir avoir des passages à niveau pour avoir vraiment des lieux sécuritaires. Mais comme c'est eux qui ont le dernier mot, on n'est pas capable d'assurer vraiment une circulation fluide dans nos arrondissements, dans nos quartiers, parce qu'on ne peut pas les forcer. Mon ancienne collègue Hélène Laverdière avait demandé qu'on donne le pouvoir au ministre des Transports d'imposer des passages à niveau pour la santé et la sécurité des gens. Les libéraux avaient voté contre. Alors, les libéraux, non seulement ils n'aident pas la situation, ils ne veulent même pas se donner les pouvoirs de contraindre ces compagnies-là à agir dans l'intérêt du public. Et ce n'est pas la première fois au Québec, parce qu'on a parlé de tragédie tantôt, de mort. N'oublions pas cette tragédie du lac Mégantic, où, à cause d'un déraillement, 47 personnes ont perdu la vie à Lac-Mégantic. On est 8 ans plus tard. Tout le monde dans la région demande une voie de contournement pour éviter qu'une catastrophe pareille se reproduise. Mais 8 ans plus tard, il ne s'est rien passé. Les gens de Lac-Mégantic attendent toujours. La MRC attend. Il y a 20 municipalités qui attendent encore là-bas. Et ça, c'est un symptôme que c'est comme si ces grandes compagnies ferroviaires au Canada étaient au-dessus des lois, au-dessus du gouvernement et sont des mauvais citoyens corporatifs. Pourquoi? Parce qu'ils ont tous les pouvoirs, ils ont tous les privilèges et les gouvernements fédéraux n'ont pas le courage de s'attaquer à ces enjeux-là et à ces questions-là. Et aujourd'hui, ce qu'on demande, c'est avec l'exemple de la police privée, mais également de revoir l'ensemble du système ferroviaire canadien parce que ça ne fonctionne pas. Il y a des gens qui meurent, il y a des gens qui souffrent et ces compagnies-là ont trop de pouvoir. Il faut les remettre à l'ordre, il faut mettre la santé et la sécurité des travailleurs et des citoyens et des citoyennes à l'avant-plan. Malheureusement, ce n'est pas le cas à cause de l'inaction du gouvernement libéral. Merci.
Thank you, Alex. Next, we'll hear from Laurie Desrochers. Laurie.
Good afternoon, everyone. Only have a little bit of time, but this is Kevin Timmerman. He was a 30-plus year railroader with CN. He was killed in the CN rail yard in 2015. I'm here. Our petitions are to support and ask Trudeau, Prime Minister Trudeau, Mr. Polyev, and Mr. Blanchette for your support as well for Canadians, Canadian railroaders who are killed on the job. We found out it took over a year to find a lawyer that would even help us, our family, because of archaic systems that we have in place, such as the Railway Safety Act and the Workers' Compensation Board of Canada. Families are barred from pursuing any type of litigation when it comes to a workplace fatality. When Kevin was killed in the Saskatoon yard, our CMP were called, the Saskatoon police and the CN police were there. CN police actually called the corporate risk manager to find out how to handle the situation. They did not know what to do. The RCMP did not know what to do, and the Saskatoon Police Department did not know what to do. They left it up to corporate risk management to handle Kevin's death. It's been, 8 years now. We've been fighting just for some type of justice. Any other corporation, any other industry in Canada where there's a workplace fatality, there is some type of investigation, an honest, open, transparent investigation. For families, there are charges, fines, possibly even jail time. Canadian railroaders are the only people in Canada that can be killed on the job, and there's no accountability. No justice for them or any of the families. I know in the past 20 years, which is around the time since the West Ray law came in, there's been 20 railroaders killed on the job, in 20 years since the West Ray. And also within that time, there have been over 60 railroaders killed on the job. Not one of those families has received any justification, no investigation. I can't get the investigation report from anybody. They have it, they won't give it. I have actually one from CN. It's probably about 90 pages. 87 pages of those is heavily redacted. There's no information in there whatsoever. I have more information from the public or from Transport Safety Board's investigation, as they were the first ones there at the time of Kevin's accident. They were not the main investigator because since it was on CN's property, Transport Canada was the main investigator. To this day, and there's been repeated requests from many different legs of government and corporations to receive this report, and we have yet to receive it. I'm very thankful to Taylor and to everybody here who's listening, and just to get the word out, and just thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Laurie. Next, we'll hear briefly from Pam Fraser. Pam.
Hello. try to speak a little louder. Can you hear me all right now?
Yeah, yes, we can hear you, Pam.
I want to say thank you to you, Taylor, Alexandre.
Pam, you've just muted yourself.
How are we doing now?
Yeah. Good.
That's much better.
Okay. I can't really hear anything, but thank you again. And to Nikki Ashton before you as well. You guys are the only politicians who have stepped up to the plate on this matter. We have made many attempts at correspondence and contact to different, well, all levels of government to help with this matter. And you three so far are the only ones to have stepped up. It's such an important matter to Canadians. We are, my son Dylan was 5th generation CP Railroad. In fact, my great-grandfather laid the track through the town that Dylan grew up in, that most of his family is still in, Scriber, Ontario. So we have a long and very tied relationship with CP Rail. None of us knew, and I venture to say the vast majority of Canadians have no idea that there is a private corporation, 2 of them in this country, that are allowed to investigate and exonerate themselves of criminal malfeasance, wrongdoing. When Dylan was killed, Andrew Dockrell, his engineer, Daniel Bulmer, their bodies lay frozen. Dylan in the engine, Daniel in the water, and Andrew outside the engine on the ground, freezing all that night. The people who came the next day to gather these bodies were CP Rail personnel, track personnel, maintenance personnel. Keith Creel, CEO of CP Rail, actually went around the grounds, according to him. So that means evidence could not be preserved. The first thing CP Rail police do is investigate the crew. This is common practice. They couldn't find fault with the crew, and so they promptly closed their investigation. RCMP was only there to assist transporting the bodies to the coroner. You can imagine how emotional this press conference is for us, because we've been trying to get justice for our loved ones for so long. I want to tell you about my son, but the time here is so limited. I want to tell you also that we gave personal pleas to the Prime Minister. We were sponsored by Teamsters to do video pleas to the Prime Minister last year, and we never heard anything from him. My mother and father did a video, and in that video, you can see them on the cp3.com. There's a website of the 3 men and the field disaster. And in that video, she's pleading with Justin Trudeau to please do something. She tells him in the video she hasn't got a lot of time left. And she begged him to do something about the private rail police so that we could get some justice for Dylan and all those other railway workers who have been harmed or killed on the railway. If you die in any conveyance in this country, you are afforded the respect and dignity of an independent investigation, but for Canadian railway personnel and employees, they are not afforded that dignity. My mother died in January. So she was right. She didn't have a lot of time. I'd like to ask the other members of Parliament, our representatives, Canadians representatives, to take a stand on this matter. No private corporation in our country should be able to investigate itself. It's absurd. I want to ask Mr. Polyev, I understand that you're new. You've just come on. I only want to say that this is a very simple issue. It's far-reaching. It's very important to Canadians. It involves some very, very powerful institutions and people. But Mr. Polyev, I hope that you could see past, for instance, I know John Baird was your co-chair of your campaign. John Baird was the transport minister. We tried getting hold of him. He refused to acknowledge us. And he was your co-chair for your campaign. So I'm asking you, and I'm asking Justin Trudeau, and I'm asking the other members of Parliament to please stand up, take a stand on this matter, get rid of private corporate police in our country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pam. And I want to thank both Laurie and Pam for having the courage to be here today to talk about their loved ones and to talk about the need for justice in this country. We were going to hear from Mr. Ranyoa, but I know we're running tight on time, so perhaps we can go to questions, and I'll defer any of the legal details to Mr. Ranyoa.
And we'll start with the questions in the room. If you're joining via Zoom, please use the raise hand function to notify us of your questions. Si vous vous joignez à nous via Zoom, utilisez la fonction lever la main pour poser votre question. David?
Hey, David Thurton, CBC. What's the response that you've been getting from the transport minister when you raise these concerns? And I'm guessing it's just silence. You're shaking your head. Yeah. So I guess, what are the families, what's the NDP going to do to kind of keep this on the agenda?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Thanks for the question, David. I have met directly with the transport minister and raised this issue. It's something that he's aware of. It's something that he claims to be working on. I specifically asked about the matter of corporate private rail police, and he indicated that this is part of current reviews that are ongoing. We need this to be addressed in a timely way. And that's why we're here today, to raise awareness and to call on the government to take immediate action to abolish private corporate rail police in Canada. Every single day, there are thousands of men and women who climb on board trains across our country and work in very challenging conditions. And we need to ensure that when things go horribly wrong, that there's an independent, credible, objective, investigative body that can look into what happened.
Let me just add to that. So thank you very much for the question. So my name is Tavengwa Runyoa. I'm legal counsel for Laurie and for Pam. I've been doing this for around 8 years or so. So when you're asking what have we done to alert the government and what are they going to do, it's been a tremendous level of disappointment. One of the things that we did was to make sure that we're diligent enough to amalgamate all the evidence that we had, not just of conceptual problems with the private police force, but evidence pointing to actual abuses of those police forces. We sent all of those documents and records to the Prime Minister's office, the Transportation Minister, the heads of all the major political parties in Canada, and it was radio silence. So if you ask yourself, why did they just not get back to us and say, you know, we think that private policing is okay, right? It's politicians' duty to take a decisive and clear stance on issues of importance of the day. But in our experience, since I started representing Laurie and thereafter starting representing Pam, it seems that this group of railway corporations are the only ones in this country that are allowed to walk on water. But on closer examination, they're not actually walking on water. It's because they are being propped up by our politicians who are supposed to be protecting victims like Pam and by Laurie. So when you're asking what did we do, not only did we contact the Transport Minister, but on multiple occasions, the Prime Minister's office, and we know that they got those communications because we got emails back saying, we got your materials, we understand your concerns, and then complete silence. So I think when if there's one takeaway, for people like yourself and everyone else in the media is to really push the government to take a public stance, because if they support the system as it is, they should just simply say, so the victims deserve an answer. And the only party that has taken this issue seriously has been the NDP, Taylor, Nikki before him, Alexandre. So just to round off, on that, you really have to wonder how a prime minister who constantly talks about having Canadians back, that's part of the lexicon, we need to know why he's turned his back on these victims. If he believes that what they experience is justice, then he should go in front of a podium and explain why it is important that a 19th century institution continues to exist in the present day and why he won't take a decisive step. He does demonstrate courage of his convictions on other issues, but that seems to dissolve when it comes to this one. And my clients, and I'm sure the families of other dead railroaders, want to know why.
And what do you see as the pathway forward to rectifying this issue? Is it amending some sort of act that already exists? Is it regulations? Is it just a flick of a pen? Like I'm guessing that maybe it's in the criminal code. I don't know how do you fix this? Because I know it's very simple to say just we need to have the railway corporation should not be investigating themselves, but like how do you move forward with this?
Thank you, and that's a great question, and that's one of the reasons why we're here today. Is we put together the two petitions, and what those petitions are asking parliamentarians to do, but principally the government of the day, is to amend sections. So actually to get rid of sections 44 and 44.1 of the Railway Safety Act, and that will be a parliamentary process, and I'm sure Taylor can provide more details about how that is implemented. But for folks who are listening who don't understand parliamentary procedure or how laws are done, it's literally a matter of opening up the law, identifying the parts, and putting a pen across all of that to say, you don't have private railway police forces, and we're now going to replace those lines that say you can have those police forces with provisions that say we're creating a new police force that is federal, funded by the railway companies, that is completely independent from them, so they're not reporting things to corporate risk management when workers die. So the technical parts will leave to the legislative drafters, but if there is one big change which these two petitions are targeted towards, is the repeal of those two sections of the Railway Safety Act that are the bedrock of this systemic rot of the rule of law.
And if any reporters have any questions online, please use the raise hand function to notify us of your questions. Si vous avez une question en ligne, utilisez la fonction lever la main pour poser une question. We'll go back to the room, David.
Me, I'm going to ask a question that's different from what the topic of discussion is today. Mr. Bachrach, and Mr. Boulerice, I want to ask you about what's happening with the BC NDP. You have one of the leadership candidates, Angeli Apadurai, who has not been allowed to run. There's a huge campaign online with the hashtag Let Her Run. So people have called what's happening in that province as undemocratic. What are your thoughts, both of you, on that?
Thanks for the question, David. So membership matters concerning the provincial party are issues for the provincial party to deal with. Obviously, one of the responsibilities of the provincial party is ensuring the integrity of the leadership election. I know that's been challenging work, but they've made the decision that they've made, and that's all I have to say about that.
There's a question online.
Nothing to add.
So Joanna oh, no, hold on. Joanna March. Oh, I cannot. Okay, so I'll. Joanna March, please unmute yourself and ask a question.
Hi, yes, thank you for taking my question. I'm with FreightWaves. It's an online freight publication based in Tennessee. Have there been former railroad police involved in this effort? If you could clarify, if there have been former police involved?
I'm going to refer that question, Joanna, to Mr. Ranyoa.
Thank you, Joanna. So if I understand your question correctly, you want to know if there are former police officers who have worked for these companies who are trying to implement change from outside of the organization?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. To my knowledge, and I can't provide too many details, but I'll just say this. There's a tremendous climate of fear amongst the rank and file, not only police officers, but former employees as well. If you might recall, Taylor might be able to speak to this more a little bit later, but in 2017, the union that represents Canadian National Railway workers made submissions to, I believe, Transport Canada when they were looking at the Railway Safety Act in 2017, suggesting what is in my client's petitions to make the police forces independent from the companies themselves. That went nowhere, but it took a tremendous amount of courage for these police officers to stand up against their bosses when they knew that they've got HR files and that corporate discipline could come down on them. So are there police officers who are interested in this issue? I would say it absolutely is, but the climate of fear is what is likely stifling any overt action by the people who know the most about the problem.
Any other questions?
Do you have a follow-up, Joanna? There's another question, une autre question de Philippe Falardeau. Go ahead. La parole est à vous.
Oui, bonjour, est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Oui, on vous entend.
Oui, je voulais I'd like to know if there are some situations where the RCMP is in effect yielding its powers and jurisdiction to private police in cases where there might be incidents that lead to death and incidents that might implicate criminal negligence.
Thanks for the question. I think that's an important one. Right now in Canada, there are a variety of investigations that take place. I would point out that the Transportation Safety Board, which investigates transportation-related accidents and incidents, isn't able to lay blame. They look mostly at the underlying causes behind incidents and point towards improvements that could prevent them in the future. But when it comes to seeking justice, especially in incidents where there may be criminal negligence, there are a variety of things that happen. And pointing back to the 2019 CP rail disaster near Field, it took quite some time before the RCMP opened their investigation, which is ongoing to this day. So perhaps I'll refer to Mr. Ranyoa and he can provide a bit more detail on that question.
Yes, thank you, Philippe. That's a fantastic question. I'd like everyone to just take a step back and ask themselves a very simple question, which is how many RCMPs do we have in Canada, right? The simple answer is we've got one, and they're regulated by the same act, and that act applies universally across the country. When the field investigation, criminal investigation started in December of 2020, we made inquiries with the RCMP Commissioner, Brenda Lucky, to say, well, we have Kevin Timmerman who died at CN Railway in Saskatoon in 2015, but the Saskatoon Police and the RCMP are saying we don't have jurisdiction because that is CN Railway's jurisdiction. So we're getting two separate answers. So we asked the BC RCMP, well, if you're investigating, clearly that means you've got jurisdiction. So why are you at the same time saying that you didn't have jurisdiction in the Kevin Timmerman case when we're dealing with the same RCMP? The commissioner did not respond. The BC RCMP did respond and basically said, well, we have jurisdiction. We'll leave anything to do with national to national. So that goes to the heart of what seems to be a level of confusion in this country, that for the longest period of time, the default was that the RCMP and public police forces simply hand over these cases to the railway companies themselves. They simply state we're there for support, to secure the scene, and to make sure that evidence is not compromised and so on and so forth. But that has been the historic pattern almost without fault. And the only reason why that changed with the Field BC disaster was because there was intense media attention, primarily from the CBC, and other outlets started to ask questions. So I think we're sitting right now at the edge of what I believe is a major transformation where the RCMP, in particular the commissioner, because she speaks for the body, to come out and say, do we have jurisdiction or do we not? And to reconcile this contradictory position that we have with Saskatchewan RCMP saying we've got no jurisdiction and British Columbia RCMP saying we have. And the only reason why I think this contradiction has come to light is because of Field, really, that has gotten a lot of more public attention. And the RCMP got to a point where they realized they probably couldn't keep not investigating. So that's why it is so important to, for whether it's journalists, the members of the public, to ask the Prime Minister, we need clarity on this. Where do you stand? Does the RCMP have jurisdiction? And if they don't, is this something that would want to formalize in those amendments to the Railway Safety Act to formally say the RCMP will have jurisdiction, public police forces will have jurisdiction, so we don't have this uncertainty and contradiction that we currently have.
Okay, I know we're running out of time here, but are there any final questions for any of us? Okay, with that, I'll thank you very much. Yeah.
I just want to say something very quickly.
Very quickly, okay.
Yeah. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify something that has been said. So when we talk about investigations, we're talking about criminal investigations. So one of the things that Taylor mentioned is the fact that the Transport Safety Board, coroners, fire marshals, all of these bodies do investigate, but none of them have criminal jurisdiction. And that's what we're talking about here. So if you hear a lot of people saying, oh, it was investigated, it was a TSB report, well, that TSB report cannot amount to criminal charges, and the TSB makes it very plain that they cannot do that. So that's why we want the criminal law to be at the center of these investigations and for it to be independent. Thank you.
And I can allow for a last question if you guys have time, because I have one on Zoom if you want to.
One more question, okay, if you have time.
Okay. Nancy Guérin, go ahead, la parole est à vous.
I don't know, can you hear?
Yeah,
Yes.
we can hear you now.
Okay, I do want to point out with the Field incident, because you had mentioned the Transportation Safety Board, and one of their investigators came out and requested that this be investigated by an outside police force. And then there was a barrage of emails between CP and Kathy Fox at the Transportation Safety Board, which seems a bit unprecedented. So along with this private police forcing, there isn't this real separation with the Transportation Safety Board and private companies. And so what can be done by that? On one hand, it's not their job, but on the other hand, they're quite influenced, or it seems, through, what the private railroads want.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And not only did one of the TSB investigators speak out, but one of the CP police investigators also spoke out. And when he spoke to the media and talked about that, he said that he was told by the company to stop investigating. So these are very, very troubling stories. As I mentioned, the incident is still under investigation by the RCMP. But what it points to is the need for clarity. Mr. Renyoa was just speaking of this. We need legal clarity, and we need to ensure that the investigative body in matters that are involving potential criminal negligence, the investigating body must be publicly accountable. It must be independent. And that's what we're lacking right now with this 19th century archaic model of allowing multi-billion-dollar corporations to essentially police themselves. It's the chicken guarding the hen house. It's a really troubling situation.
But I think that our government needs to be more accountable in these situations as well. For the railroad to try to squash one of their workers from speaking is one thing, but for our Transportation Safety Board to silence one of our government officials, to me is more problematic.
I find that extremely troubling as well, and the fact that investigator was reassigned after speaking out is something that all Canadians, and particularly rail workers and their families, should be concerned about.
All right, and this concludes the press conference. Ceci me fait la conférence de presse. Merci.
Thanks so much, everybody.